Well, good afternoon. My name's Wayne Wheeler. I'm the founder of the Lighthouse Society 30 years ago. Seems like about 4, but time flies when you're having fun. Colonial lighthouses. Now this is very important. People don't get into this a lot, but we have these various periods and they were very, very different. The first, the colonial period, which I'm going to be talking about here, 1716, Boston until 1789. Then we had the early federal, when the lighthouses were transferred to the new government. And the early federal period, when we became a country, you know, there was the federal government was limited. They could do an army, navy, or militia, navy, coin money, postage, international affairs, disputes between states. They really couldn't do much of anything. But Alexander Hamilton wanted lighthouses transferred to the government so we'd have a homogeneous system for foreign vessels as well as our vessels, because our country was going to grow by water. The fastest way to get anywhere is by water. I mean, a horse can only go so long and only so fast. A schooner can do 18, 19, 20 knots, and it can go all day and all night. So water is very important. But some of the senators didn't want that. He said, well, you know, the government's going to take land from our state. They didn't like that. So they went back and forth, and they finally passed the Commerce Clause. And that's the clause that is Interstate Commerce Commission, FAA, FCC, CC, PP, DB, all of that alphabet is because of the Commerce Clause and lighthouses. And the other thing the lighthouse did cause to happen in our country is the taking clause, now called eminent domain. The very first taking was an island, 10 acres on Baker Island in the Boston Bay. A farmer owned it, the island. He didn't want to give the 10 acres up, so they took it. They paid him what they thought was, and probably was, a fair price for it. Taking clause and the Commerce Clause. And then I'm just going to tiptoe very quickly through this. And so this went back and forth for up till 1820. It went to Treasury and then went to another department and then back to Treasury and so on. And finally, it went under Treasury for good in 1820. And they put it under this guy. Look at that smiling face. I don't know if you can see it or not. It looks like he eats lemons or something. Usually in my slideshows, I'll say, now I want to show you somebody that came into power in 1820. Stephen Pleasanton. Isn't that a wonderful sound? Oh, what a nice name. Must be a wonderful guy. And then you look at this guy, you go, what? Anyways, when the British were about to burn Washington, he saved 7 canvas bags full of documents like Declaration of Independence, all of the Washington papers and so on, and he took them out into Virginia to keep them from the British. Then he went back to Treasury and he saw the Declaration of Independence, or maybe it was something else, on the wall, and he had to tear it out and cut it out and take it out. Anyways, he didn't know lighthouses from outhouses, but he was in charge, and the 5th auditor of the Treasury. And this guy came in, and he was a charlatan, and I'll probably talk about him a little bit. And he'd stolen a reflector design from Amy Argon, the Swiss scientist that invented it, came over here, had it patented in this country in 1810, sold it to the government, turned right around, sold it to the government for $60,000, which is about $1.4 million in today's money. And then he got the contract for 7 years to build and supply them to the government. Oh, he was a riverboat gambler. Anyways, by the time 1820 came along, he had this guy didn't know anything. So he says, well, just keep doing what you're doing. I'm researching it, and I'm going to write a book on this guy. So Pleasanton was in charge until 1850. And meanwhile, the Fresnel lens came out, like up there, in 1822. And we didn't, Pleasanton was so cheap, he was a bean counter, that he would not authorize the construction. Well, our mariners are going to Europe and they're seeing, hey, look at the bright lights of Paris, so to speak. So they come back and they complain because our lighthouses, I'll show you later, were really a piece of crap. I mean, we were using these. The parabolic reflector isn't bad if it's parabolic, but this guy was just hammering them out, and one inspector said they're about as parabolic as a wasp basin, the baby's wasp basin. Anyways, he held sway, and there was so much problem and complaints from the mariners that our lighthouse system was investigated in the 1830s and twice in the 1840s, and finally they commissioned. In 1851, they commissioned an ad hoc committee called the Lighthouse Board, and they sent men to France and England to find out what the hell was going on around there. And they went up and down this lighthouse here. The keeper doesn't think it's necessary to light up until it gets good and dark. Keeper was a retired blacksmith. No instructions in the lantern room. I mean, it was a horror story. Not this lighthouse, another one. 12-year-old boy in charge. Doesn't know where the keeper is. Lantern room wants painting. Kitchen's breaking away from the house. On and on and on. So this lighthouse board became in charge of lighthouses in 1852, and it was military. Navy commanders or captains or lieutenant commanders, depending on the size of the district, took over the districts. And they really squared us away, and they imported all of these Fresnel lenses. And in 1903, commerce was invented, and commerce took over lighthouses, but the board stayed around till 1810. And then they established the Bureau of Lighthouses. Sounds like one of these movie or radio shows from the 50s or the 30s. And the Bureau civilianized, and they got prior sea captains and so on. And they did a good job, kind of boring, but did a good job. Started to automate in the teens and the 20s as different equipment came in to allow automation. And then in 1939, the Lighthouse Service went under the Coast Guard, and they still have them. It was Treasury. So it went from Commerce to Treasury to Transportation to Homeland Security. And that's the story, just to give you an idea. I'm just learning PowerPoint, and that's supposed to go the other way. Constructed by the colonies. Each colony was different, and each colony, and I don't think Mother England helped much in the construction. I think it was pretty much up to the colonies how to raise the money and construct them. There was no standard of construction. This one's pretty solid. Fired at by both sides during the War of 1812 and Revolutionary War without much damage. It's not the only colonial lighthouse, as you may have heard earlier. Boston Lighthouse is also colonials, 1784. The original was 1716. The British and the Americans took turns blowing it up, and I'll talk about that. The ports collected light dues. For every ship that came into the port and left, American ships paid less than foreign ships, but they collected this money. As a matter of fact, the lottery that they set up for this lighthouse, the New York merchants, I'll show you. I'll show you this slide here, and the slide is a receipt to the captain of this ship. He filled it in, a standard receipt, and it tells that it's 6 pounds 3 pence. I'm making that figure up. The 3 pence went to 6 pounds went to the port, and the 3 pence went to the continuing maintenance of this lighthouse. So a little bit of all the light dues. Those are light dues. The light stations were maintained by the colonies. The keepers were selected by the spoils system. And the keepers also acted as pilots, and sometimes they went out fishing, or they raised crops. Sometimes, if they were in an area where the crops were easy to raise, they may have sold them to the local city. Here we go. There were 12, not 11, except Georgia thinks their Tybee is one of them, but I've never been able to prove it. But look at the concentration here. We've got Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Newburyport, Massachusetts, which was a range light, Cape Ann, which was the first island light station, twin tower in this country. Plymouth, another twin tower. 2 on Nantucket, Beavertail, Rhode Island. New London, and that's all New England. And then we have Sandy Hook, Cape Henlopen. Cape Henlopen's the entrance to Delaware Bay, and then Charleston. The 3 big ports, New Yorkers are going to hate this: Boston, Philly, and Charleston. New York didn't get that big until the Erie Canal went through. What? Yeah, all of that stuff coming down lake, all of the lumber, the crops, the finished materials, down lake, across the Erie Canal, down the Hudson River, grew New York from the inside out. But it didn't happen until 1822. The Irish weren't coming in until the 40s. Germans sometime towards the end of the century, and then the Italians early in the century. So those were the first 12. Boston, of course, was the first, 1716. And this is an aqua tint of the era, supposedly showing the Boston Lighthouse. I personally don't think it's very accurate. I don't think it's anywhere near that high. But the reason for it was, here's the Boston Lighthouse. It's Little Brewster Island. And look at all of the things you can bump into here. And besides all of those islands, there's lots of shoals and rocks and other dangerous things, currents. The northeasters coming down here, setting you down on rocks, the Cohasset rocks, which are over here off of Cohasset, Massachusetts. So the merchants were losing a lot of stuff, and they petitioned the brethren of the Bay State, Commonwealth, to build a lighthouse. And so they did in 1716, and they hired a keeper, George Worthylake. They paid him 50 pounds a year. I have no idea how much that is. And George Worthylake and his wife and 2 daughters stayed at that lighthouse. And then George Washington, in his first victory, was surrounding Boston while the British were there, and he actually forced them out. But before the British left, they were going back and forth over this island. And when the Americans left, they tried to blow it up, and they were unsuccessful. And when the British left, they tried, and they were unsuccessful, and went back again. The last time the British left, they were successful. Later on, it was only this high, and there was a lantern room here. This was added. And then fire and storms caused it to start to split and spall. So they added these iron rings, which are there today. There's a funny story about this. That it's out here, and it's tall. And it's out there in the middle of the bay, or at the end of the bay, so lightning hits it. And so the keepers every now and then are getting zapped by the lightning hitting the tower. So and this is in the 1700s, so they asked the brethren, could we have a lightning rod, after lightning rods were invented by, I guess, Benjamin Franklin? And he said, what? You would presume that the hand of man would stay the will of God? Oh, no, you don't get a lightning rod. So this is kind of the island it is today. 1784, that was the old Whistle House here. There's an outhouse around here, there it is. And that's the keeper's house and the boathouse. And there used to be a duplex there too, but the Coast Guard raised it sometime 40s or 50s. And a close-up of it. There's a group that, Friends of Boston Bay or Islands, yeah, and they give tours out there at least once a year. The first fog signal in this country was a cannon, 1719. And ships coming in fog. I have a whole series here on fog signals too, if you want to see it. Ships coming in fog would fire their cannon, fire a blank. And the keeper would hear that, and he'd fire a blank. And hopefully that would direct the skipper in. More often than not, they dropped the hook and waited, because you don't know where that sound's coming from. Sound can hit a wall of air, cold air, and bounce. It's there? No, it's over here. Now, George Worthylake, in 1718, went ashore to get paid and get provisions. He had some sheep on the next island over too that he tended. And he went with his wife and one of his daughters. And they had a handyman, may have been a slave. And they're coming back to the island. Nobody knows, but I think it probably was a pilot boat. And a canoe, I guess the handyman came out of the canoe to pick them up. They got in the canoe, capsized, they all drowned. Everybody drowned. So that's the story of Boston. This is up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It's not the original, obviously. It was built in 18, probably sometime after the Civil War, I'm going to guess 1870s. And this is Plum Island off Newburyport, Massachusetts, which was originally a range light, and it was rebuilt many times and also shifted because the entrance would shift with the sand and the shoals, so they'd have to shift the rear lights so the mariner could figure his way in. The first island light station, and very important because the Great Circle route bringing vessels in from Europe, they came down past Thatcher Island, which is off of Rockport. The original looked like, sort of like this. It was actually a little shorter than this, and there were two of them, double tower, because back then we weren't able to rotate lenses or produce a flash. So by having two, the mariner could tell the difference between a one. But that's an early one, and this is what it looks like today. Pretty hard to see here, but there's a keeper's house, a duplex, the two towers. There's an oil house in the middle, fog signal, boathouse, and there's a tramway that goes like this on the island, bisects the island two ways, so they could bring the coal up to the houses or to the fog signal, coal or wood, whatever they were using in that era. This is still operational. This one is under the Fish and Wildlife. They have control of the island for some things. And then this is Plymouth, Mass, or Gurnet, another twin tower, south of Boston, right at the cusp of Cape Cod. There were two towers here. Only this one exists, and it's the oldest wooden tower in the country. I'm going to guess and say 1808, somewhere right around there. And then we have the entrance to Nantucket Harbor. There were 8 lighthouses here. This is the second lighthouse built in the country. There were 8 at that point. The first one blew down, the next one burned down, the next one blew down, the next one burned down. They moved it back for a while, then they moved it back out there. And then the other end of the island is the Great Point Lighthouse. This was Colonial, and this is how it looked until 1984 when it imploded. There was a lot of erosion underneath it, and a storm came in there and it just sort of fell in on itself. Kennedy got a couple $1 million and they rebuilt it on time, under budget for $1 million, using the original stone, solarized it, of course, and nobody knows what happened to the other $1 million. Oh well. Must be under the Dyke Bridge. Beavertail, one of the first few. Lighthouse, it was like this. There's an early drawing of it. And it was down here in the point. You can still see the base of it. Their circle of stones is there. This is the site of one of the first fog signals. Not the Bell fog signal, the first air fog signal. The Dayballs of Connecticut invented a caloric engine. Anyways, they had a treadmill with a horse on it. And the horse would go like this, and the treadmill would go around, and it would power these pistons in a big tank, and it would pump air and compress the air. And then the keeper occasionally would pull they had a ship's whistle. He would pull this chain, it would go like that. That came later, 1910. New London, Connecticut, built in 1760 and then rebuilt 1804, 1808, somewhere in there. And that's how she looks today. Built like this one, octagon, really did a nice job. And then here's good Sandy Hook. You can see Sandy Hook's right out here, and this is so important for vessels coming in here. And you can't just come in anywhere here because there's lots of shoals here. Gidney Channel is in through here. like that, and that's probably what they used to use. So Sandy Hook Lighthouse, and then further down the coast, I'll come back to Sandy Hook in a minute. Further down the coast is Henlopen on the south entrance of Delaware Bay. And another octagon. They had trouble here all the time with sand. Sometimes sand would come up so high they had to get out the second-story windows. They were always trying to plant brush and stuff. In fact, the British came here in 1813, somewhere around there, 1814. And the keeper took all the oil and went over. There used to be a little grove of pines over there or some kind of tree, and they hid all the stuff there. They came in, they were looking for cattle, for meat and things like that. Anyways, in 1927, erosion finally took over, and it ended up down on the beach. They'd already, you can see here, they'd already taken the lens out by 1927. And then there's the one off Charleston. And again, it's not original. There was a range lights down there on an island off of Charleston. This is an 1870 design. It's the same as Cape Hatteras, Currituck, Ponce Inlet, not Ponce Inlet, Cape St. Augustine, Florida, Pigeon Point, California, Yaquina Head, Oregon has the same 1870. It's a hollow wall. There's two walls there with a space in between, and there are reasons for that. Less bricks, less expensive. Keeps it insulated, warm in the winter, cool in the summer. Less weight, so you can build it in a place that would have trouble taking a lot of weight, the ground. Anyways, this lighthouse used to be on an island, and there were houses out there, summer houses, winter houses, a life-saving service station, and the keeper's houses. But the entrance to Charleston kept silting in, so they got the Corps of Engineers, and they do good work, but sometimes. So they extended the breakwaters out, and what it did was it did not silt in anymore. Now it's a clear entrance in there. Sail in there anytime you want. Beautiful. Except that it created a current south of the jetties, the Gulf Stream coming up, and it eroded the island, and it was all gone. It's all gone. The only thing left is this, and it's on very deep foundation of probably 30 feet of huge cross pieces of lumber and granite. Hurricane Hugo went right over that lighthouse. Isn't that amazing? It's still there. The people in Georgia think their Tybee Lighthouse was one of the original 13, they say. I can't see that. I say 12. But that's an early shot of it. It was much shorter, got blown up, top of it got blown up in the Civil War. During the Civil War, our ships running a blockade wanted these lighthouses lit to help them navigate, fix their position. And the South didn't want that. And the South did want some of them for observation, so they could see what the hell was going on. You were up there a ways. But somebody, I can't remember which side, took the top of it off, and then they got rebuilt. The guy that was in charge of this for many years, a good friend of mine, just died recently. Down south, we say passed away. But he did a hell of a job. Beautiful job restoring that whole light station. There's that thing for Sandy Hook. Received 1,768, that's the year, from Samuel Guilford, master of the brig Cornelia, I think it is, for 65. Oh, it's burthened 65 tons from Jamaica, bound to Jamaica, the sum of $73.12. The 12 pence went to this lighthouse. Now, originally, this lighthouse and all those lighthouses I showed you, right up until 1852, when the Lighthouse Board took over, had these very crude lanterns like this. There's only 3 left in this country. This is at Salmon River, New York, on Lake Ontario, because it went out of service before the Lighthouse Board came in. It only served from 1826 to, I don't know, 1834, something like that. And it's iron, small panes of glass, hammered copper top, terrible looking vent up there. I've been in here, big, heavy timbers like that, securing it to the roof, but very inadequate. It had very poor ventilation. You had little tiny glass windows like this. And we didn't know how to make glass in this country until Industrial Revolution, 1840, that era, something like that. They used to say, in some cases, they would say, the contractors to buy the best French glass, install the best French glass, because our glass was striated and it had bubbles in it and all that stuff. So Sandy Hook, the Revolution you heard today, and also in the War of 1812, while the British were anchored off there, they had a water barge behind them. And they put a midshipman and 6 men in the barge, in the ship's boat. To go back, they just kind of paid out a line rope to back there so they could get the water and then haul them back to the ship so they could get the water on the ship. Well, the guys wanted to mutiny, or they didn't want to mutiny, they wanted to desert. So they overpowered the midshipman, cut the rope line, and went into shore. Well, the British commander was all in a tizzy about that. So he sent a second lieutenant and 9 men in a boat, longboat, probably maybe like the one you're going to see demonstrated today, I don't know. And as they were coming into shore to round these guys up, capture them, a squall came up and capsized the boat and they all drowned. So all 10 of them were buried here next to the lighthouse in a grave that the second lieutenant's mother, put a monument there, paid for it, one single grave, but 10 coffins, and then it was moved later. Anyways, this shows them digging up these coffins to move them, and it's in a cemetery somewhere very close on this property, I believe. And there they are coming in from the ship. Optics. Well, we started out with the Pharos of Alexandria, Egypt, and it was started by Ptolemy I in his son, in 300 BC, and his son Ptolemy II finished it in 280 BC. And over the years, they used whatever burned. They had maybe cotton bales with oil or coal up in the north, the Scandinavian countries, Scotland, or wood, a lot of wood. And it was not a very good light because you had wind and you had rain and it just was a smudgy, smoky, not too good for the mariner. And this guy, Hutchins, in 1780-ish, invented this. It was a wooden dish with pieces of glass pressed in a mastic with a oil light on the front. And it wasn't always whale oil, folks. It was fish oil, porpoise oil, whatever. And so that was an improvement. And then Amy Argon invented this, the argon lamp. That's the one Winslow Lewis stole and had patented. And it directs the light out to the mariner, but it kind of diffuses a little bit. So there's a parabolic mirror with a lamp in here. But Amy also invented a hollow wick system. 2 wicks, 3, 4, 5 wicks, as many as 5 wicks. The 5th wick would be this big. And there were brass canisters, if you will, between them, tubes, to let air up through. And it caused it to burn very hot. And because of an accident, which I won't go into, his brother, he saw something his brother did. He did something with a wine bottle and blah, blah, blah. But anyways, it was a hipped type of, it used to be straight, the chimneys. And this glass chimney has a hip to it, and it keeps the air currents in on the flame, so it burns very steady and very true and very bright. Later on, this is how they would hang them in a chandelier like that, so you could have light all around the horizon if it was necessary. Because they couldn't rotate them from the get-go, they would build 2 towers, just like I showed you here at Thatcher Island, which is Cape Ann Light Station. This is La Heuve in France. And that's Le Heuve over there, however you pronounce it. So they would have 2 so the mariner could tell the difference between what he's seeing up and down the coast. This is originally how Cape Elizabeth looked up in Maine, and that's the Cape Elizabeth eastern light up there. And here they are. See how far apart they are? So the mariner could see that there was two separate lights. Probably could also use those as kind of a range coming in from the east. Here's a couple of more. This is Baker Island. That's where they had the taking clause, Baker Island. And right up above us here, Navesink, the Navesink Lighthouse. That's the second Navesink lighthouse, by the way, but they were both twin towers. And then this is Gurnett or Plymouth, Massachusetts. Out here, the first lighthouse on Cape Cod was 1799, Cape Cod Lighthouse. They call it Truro, but it's a Cape Cod Lighthouse. And the next one, they did a double tower here at Chatham. So the mariner coming down here is going to see one, and then he's going to see two. So what are you going to put in the middle, one or two? No, they put three, right here, 1, 2, 3. Now by this time, Europe was rotating lenses, but because of Winslow Lewis and old Stephen Pleasanton, they didn't take that up. So they built these 3 lighthouses to give 3 lights, and they kind of look like ladies with hats back then. 1823, I'm guessing, 27. So they call them the Three Sisters of Nauset. They were discontinued, I don't know when, 40s, 50s. And 2 of them were put together as a dance studio with something between them, moved. And this was a hot dog stand. Finally, the National Park Service, the Cape Cod National Seashore, reacquainted them. They bought them, moved them back there, and they put them on the same line they were, except that the whole East Coast is eroding, and so they moved it back. I mean, they couldn't have put them where they originally were anyways. There wasn't anything there but water. But anyways, they're historically in the correct alignment anyways. And now we've got parabolic reflectors on a chandelier that is rotated by a weight in a clockwork mechanism. So as this bank comes around, you get a flash. You either have a solid white light or you get light and dark, characteristic. And there's Winslow Lewis with his patent. The old scallywag, he stole this from Amy Argon. And he also added a convex green piece of glass here, a lens he called it, to theoretically increase the light. Well, first of all, if you add color, you're cutting the amount of light you could have from white to 28%. 28%, red or green. Cuts the hell out of color. Secondly, every time light goes into glass, if it's perfectly flat and perfectly clear, you lose 8%. So you're losing 8% going in, 8% coming out, plus it's colored. That didn't work. But anyways, he got away with it because he was hoodwinking Stephen Pleasanton. Fresnel, Augustin Fresnel, a French engineer, was a sickly child. He finally graduated from engineering school and he was assigned to the French canals and roads. And he did that for a while, and then Napoleon came back into charge, and it was a spoil system and he was out of a job. So he started messing around with light. And he came up with this theory that ran against the guy that got hit on the head with the apple, Newton, some time before. But Ampère, the French scientist Ampère, championed him and told the local academy, whatever they say in French, this guy's for true. And so they took him in, they believed him, and this was his first lens, very crude. These are mirrors to direct the light up here. And these are dioptic prisms, which bend the rays twice. Later on, you had catadioptic prisms that bend, refract, reflect, refract into the horizontal. So you got rid of the mirrors. And these are, you can see here, the lens. And here's how it works. These are dioptic prisms, and you can see it's reflected twice. There's a mathematical formula used to reflect that light out into the horizontal. But these are so steep up here that you have to go like this, and it reflects it up to the top, it reflects it to the front, and refracts it into the horizontal. This way you're capturing 80% of that central light source for the Mariner. Each one of these little prisms is set in a grass frame with wooden wedges to hold them in. Each side of that prism, it's a triangle, has 3 wedges, and then a 19th century caulk called Lafarge. It's white lead and linseed oil. And it has a shelf life of 30 years. The Coast Guard took over in I was in the Coast Guard for 23 years before I did this, for 30. But the Coast Guard has never replaced that stuff, and it's going to eventually fail if they don't figure out something to do with it, reconstitute it somehow. And so here we've got one of the lenses. This is a rotating lens. And here is a reflector system that would take the light and pop it out in the other direction. Now there's 3 kinds of lenses. There's 9 sizes. Hyperradial, mesoradial, first order, second, third, third and a half, fourth, fifth, sixth. And that's sizes. There's 3 types. There's a fixed, which has prisms all the way around, gives you a steady white light. And there's rotating, with prisms, with bullseyes, so as it rotates, you get a flash. The third time, FVF, fixed, varied with flash. The FVF would have fixed, and then every other panel would have a bullseye. So as the lens rotates, you have a steady white light, and all of a sudden, bingo. Now that's the best of both worlds, because with a fixed lens, the Mariner always sees it, but he doesn't know what the hell it is. What am I looking at? Which lighthouse is that? With the rotating, he has a characteristic which helps him pick out the lighthouse. But when it's dark, he doesn't see anything. With a fixed varied with flash, he has a flash and then steady light and a flash. So he always has something in sight, plus he has a characteristic. Best. There weren't a lot of those, unfortunately. Well, thank you. Thank you for listening.